Hi, everyone. This is Aaron, and welcome to our Sola Network podcast. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that Sola Conference 2020 is coming soon on March 27th through 28th at Evergreen Baptist Church of SGV. The theme is Reconciled, and registration is now open. Kim Kira, Watson Jones III, and Owen Lee will be speaking, and Jimmy Needham will be leading us in singing. Check out our conference page on the Sola Network website for the schedule, seminar speaker lineup, and more. I'll put that link in the show notes. Make sure you register because the first 350 individuals to register will be entered to win a pair of AirPod Pros. They'll be the perfect fit for you to listen to our podcasts. In today's episode, I spoke with Asian-Australian writer Heidi Tai. She recently wrote the article Bushfires, Coronavirus, and Kobe. Has God Abandoned 2020? So we talk about the story behind her article, her salvation testimony, her podcast called The Greater Story, and her new Patreon plans for 2020. She also offers 2 excellent writing tips on considering your audience when writing and the importance of prayer when writing. Thanks for listening. Heidi Tai, thanks
Hi.
for taking this call. You're in Australia. This is my first time talking to somebody in Australia. I think you're my only Australian friend now.
You're kidding.
No,
I
I'm
didn't know
serious.
that.
I'm serious. I'm totally stuck here in Los Angeles, California, and this is my world. But you are expanding my world, and now I have an Australian friend. Thanks for
That
doing
is
this.
so funny. What do you think about my accent?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I've heard you before, like on your own
Oh, yeah,
podcast.
true.
So I knew what I was expecting, but yeah, I think it's great. You told me you don't live in Sydney, and Sydney is like
No.
the famous city, I guess. So
Yeah.
where are you exactly?
Yeah, so I live in Brisbane, which is about a 12-hour drive from Sydney or a 1-hour plane ride. It's up north. It's hot. It's humid. It has lots of insects and dangerous reptiles. So all
Really?
those stories you hear about dangerous
Yeah,
insects and
it's
reptiles,
all
that's
true.
actually true. Yeah, so Brisbane, it's a smaller city compared to Sydney, so people are slower but more friendly. So everyone likes to small talk in shops, and they're more likely to greet each other, which is really, really nice.
But it is
Yeah.
like a city, though. It's not a suburb, I guess.
Yeah, it's a city, but it's just small and slow, and I think people come up here and they're like, oh, this is actually a nice place to retire.
Oh, no. Okay.
Yeah.
That's nice. Do you drive? Yeah. Are there buses? Like, how do you guys get around in Brisbane, Australia?
So in Sydney, there's a really good train line that, kind of connects the whole of Sydney. But in Brisbane, people do take buses, but you do need a car to get around. It is harder to get around. So you don't really see people walking on the streets. I think people often say that Sydney is like New York. So it's a walkable city. There's lots going on everywhere. But Brisbane is more like LA, so more spread out, lots of highways, and you need a car.
Oh, cool. So I guess we're more similar than what I originally imagined then.
Yeah, but I think LA has a bigger population.
Yeah, maybe just a little bit. And your church is in Brisbane. Brisbane or Brisbane? Brisbane?
Brisbane.
Yeah. Your church is there?
Yes. So we have a church in a suburb called Sunnybank. It's a multicultural suburb with lots of different cultures, which is great. And it's what we're used to. So that's where we church. Yeah, and it's called Providence.
Providence, yes. And your husband is the pastor?
Yes, that's right.
Okay,
yeah.
So tell me that story. How did you guys do this church planning deal? Like what caused all of this?
Yeah, so 5 years ago, Mikey, who's my husband, and we decided to move from Sydney to Brisbane to start a new church. And I guess we've always had a heart for, reaching the new generation, so millennials, with the gospel. We both have baby faces, so we look much younger than we actually are. And instead of, despairing over that, we decided to use it our advantage and to reach young people with the gospel. And so a lot of people, they do come to our church and they're like, oh, who's the pastor? Who's the pastor's wife? And we're like, oh, it's us. And they're like, oh, no, we've told you everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess what makes us passionate about reaching the new generation is that the stats do show that in Australia, the church is dying. The church is struggling to reach 18 to 25-year-olds because these are the people that don't see the church as relevant anymore. And that's a really big problem because if we're not reaching the new generation, who are going to be the next leaders in Australia? And so I guess after Bible college, we decided to plan a church with the hopes of, reaching the new generation and addressing, I guess, the spiritual questions that millennials, do have.
Wow. Okay. You just told me a lot right there. You went to Bible college with your husband, Mikey. And how did that happen? Like, did you always know you wanted to go to Bible college? Like, were you guys dating before Bible college? Like, what's your story and what's his story? How did this happen?
Yeah. So he, I guess, studied a law degree, which he absolutely hated.
Okay.
To make his dad happy. So I don't know how many Asian boys resonate with that. But I guess after graduating from his degree, he decided, look, I want to do something for myself. And he's always been passionate about mission, teaching the Bible to others. And so Bible college was naturally the path that he wanted to take. I never thought I would go to Bible college. I was terrified of the idea, or even the concept of like reading the Bible was hard for me. And so I only did a 1-year degree. But the reason why I did it was because I wanted to be more equipped before we church planted. I don't regret it. It was the hardest year of my life, though, because studying the Bible was very challenging. It, I guess, challenged a lot of my beliefs as well, because it was an interdenominational college. And so I was studying with people who believe very different things to me. And so it challenged me, but it also helped me to defend the gospel and to be more convicted in what I believe in. Yeah.
Well, what's your salvation story exactly? Because, okay, you didn't want to go to college, or you didn't want to go to Bible college, but I guess you were a Christian already in high school and stuff. Yeah. So what's your salvation story?
It's a long story, but I think my whole life I was on the search for love and safety. So I grew up in a dysfunctional home, I would say. My dad and I had a really broken relationship, and I guess I grew up feeling like I was unwanted. So it was very clear from the very beginning of my childhood that I was an accident, and that, compared to my friends at school, I wasn't the daughter that my father seemed to love. And so I guess that led me down a journey of seeking after approval in all the wrong things, success, boys, popularity, and it led to a lot of, regrettable decisions as well. And so even though on the outside I was this really bubbly, popular party girl, deep down I had this deep emptiness, and I just couldn't seem to find anything to fill that void. But I miraculously have always been in contact with Christians. And so in primary school, one of my first friends was a Christian girl, and she used to teach me Christian songs, and I wasn't even aware of it at the time. Yeah. And so from a young age, I was already singing, love the Lord you go with me. And I didn't even know what I was singing, but I think ever since then, I can see God's, I guess, hand in my life. And so, in high school, I did make a really, really good friend, and she was a Christian, completely different to me. And she was very different. She had this peace and joy that I didn't seem to have at all. She was really loving. So even though I treated her really badly at times, she was so forgiving. And there was actually another Christian girl that I unfortunately bullied throughout high school. And when my grandmother passed away, she actually slipped a letter into my locker that said, I'm thinking of you, I'm praying for you. And so little things like that, I'm like, man, Christians are so different, and they live a life that's very different, and they seem to have this security and love that's very different. And so, yeah, at a very low point in my life, my best friend actually came to my house and she said, "Look, Heidi, you've always thought that Christianity is for good people or people who have their lives all together. You've always thought that Jesus only loves, good girls. But I want you to know, and you know this already because you've heard the gospel many times, I want you to know that Jesus came to love women just like you. He came to heal the sick." And yeah, that night I prayed. I said, "God, if you're actually real, reveal yourself to me." And that week I decided to go to church,
Okay.
Actually by myself because my friend went on exchange. And
Okay.
that's why she wanted to come and talk to me.
Oh, wow.
So I went to church by myself.
Yeah.
And as soon as I walked through the doors, this really friendly girl came up to me and she said, "Look, are you new? Let's catch up for coffee sometime." And I said yes. I was like, "Oh, is this how God's going to reveal himself to me?" She asked me to read the Bible with her and I was like, "Oh, great. Like,
yeah.
why is this happening?" Can't he just talk to me through some divine intervention? But we opened the Bible together and it was like everything just suddenly made sense. We read Genesis together. We read 1 Peter together, and just all the questions that I ever had in life, where to find love, why is there so much brokenness in this world? Yeah, all of that was found in the Bible.
Yeah. Well, that's an amazing testimony. Thank you so much for sharing that with me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know you're a storyteller, but are you used to telling your story like this, giving your testimony a lot? Because I don't know, this is really powerful stuff.
I don't know. I get nervous every time still. And people say I'm a writer and a storyteller, but I still don't see myself in that.
Well, I mean, I do.
I feel like a rambler.
No.
I feel like a rambler.
No, that
professional rambler.
No, that definitely was not rambling.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, well, before we start about your rambling career and writing,
yes.
where did your husband come into the picture with all of this, I guess?
So that friend of mine who read the Bible with me, she one day put up a photo of us. And usually I don't tell this story to people I've just met.
Oh, yeah.
Because we give the other version.
Right.
So she put up a photo of us and he was like, "Oh, you've made a new friend. Who is she?" That was on Facebook. Okay. And this was before internet dating was, the thing.
Yeah.
So at the time it was very contentious and it's like, "Ooh, you've met someone online." But by God's grace, and plan, it worked out.
Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, and thank you for sharing that with me too. I mean, I don't know, I know you from your writing and stuff, but is his internet presence the same as yours? Does he have a blog? Does he have I don't know, is he creative in the same way that you are?
Well, he would say that I'm the creative one.
Okay.
Out of the two of us, but I think he's very creative. I think he's a great preacher. I think he's great at contextualizing, I guess, the gospel also with stories to the people in our church. And, he was the one that pushed me to start a blog because I think, he actually used to have a blog that people used to read. But he has so many ideas and so many projects that he has on his mind that he wants to achieve. And he's like, "Heidi, you've got to do it on my behalf."
And I'm really glad that he told you to do it, or he asked you to do it, or encouraged you to do it, because you're doing great.
Oh, thank you.
I guess kind of knew about you through Sola, and that's how we're doing this podcast. But how did you get involved with Sola Network from the beginning?
Yeah, so I think in 2018 I published a story, Closing the Cultural Gap, which was a story that I wrote with my dad, and the Gospel Coalition got a hold of it and shared it.
And how did they do that though? It just randomly appeared in searches, or how did they get a hold of it?
It was interesting. I wrote this story for a competition in Australia, and I didn't even think it was that good. So it was literally a story I had written in my notes.
Oh, okay. Nice.
Yeah. So just one day I decided to write a story in the notes section on my phone. And then I submitted it for a competition. And out of nowhere, people started reading it and sharing it. And I realized, oh, wow, my perspective is actually helpful and people want to learn and hear how, I guess, the gospel helped me and my dad to reconcile the tension between East and West in our family. And so the Gospel Coalition in Australia ended up finding the story, and they said, look, we'd like to publish it on our site. And I think it somehow synced over to the American site, and Hannah found it. I don't actually know. I should ask her. Yeah. And then I think she reached out to me and said, look, I manage a platform called Solar Network, and she explained what you guys do. And I was blown away by what you guys do and just the vision that you have in reaching the emerging generation with the gospel, in allowing, Asian American or Australian writers to have a platform for their voice. So I was like, hey, I'm all in. So yeah, thanks, Hannah. Shout out to you.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm glad you came on board. I think the thing about your writing that I resonate with, and obviously what your readers resonate with, is your emphasis on family, and I think that anybody, can relate to that, obviously in different ways, but because you have a unique background, I guess, with your Asian culture, but then also, being a millennial and all these different things, and you're able to write freely and openly about it. Like you're not scared to share about relationships or even like difficulties. I think that's what makes your writing really relatable and readable for everybody. Can you tell me more about like inspiration behind maybe some more of your articles or even your Lazy Susan project?
So I think God has always been preparing me for this work, even before I knew he existed. So funny story, I, in high school, actually had a blog, and I would write the most ridiculous stuff on it, including things I didn't like about my teachers. And somehow...
Wow.
My principal found it one day, and it led to me getting suspended. So that week, a youth group leader actually came up to me, and he said, Heidi, you have such a way with words. Imagine if you were to one day use it to spread the message of Jesus or something like that. And I remember laughing in his face and thinking he was a weirdo.
Right. Yeah.
But it's funny how, things work out.
Yeah.
I do think that ever since then, God has been preparing me for this work and using the people around me to I guess, encourage me to use my words for good and to use it as a way of making Jesus known. And so it's not like God has ever said, I've never audibly heard his voice saying, Heidi, you need to write this or you need to write that. But he's called me to a life of holiness. He's called me to reflect Christ's character in all that I do. He's called me to always be ready to give a reason for the hope that I have in Jesus. And so this is what empowers me to use my stories, whether they're stories that are really joyful or stories that are really, really sad and filled with grief and struggle and weakness, for his glory. And so Lazy Susan, it is a collection of short stories where I just share about my life growing up in Australia as an Asian Australian. I'm really open about, the struggles I faced with, racism and just feeling like I didn't have an identity, I didn't have a voice, I never really belonged. And I really think and believe that what the Bible says is true. In our weakness, God's strength is most powerfully displayed. And it's only when we're honest with our weaknesses that people can actually give glory to God for, what he's done in your life. And so, I have this tagline for my blog, to sketch honest words from a hope-filled heart. And I think that encapsulates everything that I strive to do through my blog, through my short stories. and through being vulnerable, which isn't easy. Like, I'm not saying it's easy at all.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, and I don't take it for granted just reading your words. Like I don't think like you're easily just writing this stuff out. No, I'm assuming that yeah, you're being thoughtful and maybe even like wrestling with your word choices and how you're going to present the stories the way you do. And when you do, it comes out great. It comes out beautifully, and I think it really is
Oh,
a
thank
testament
you.
to God's work in your life. Heidi, why don't you give us some tips, some advice for new writers? Do you write all your articles on your notes app on your phone still?
A lot of my stuff stems from that notes app. Um, but I'm also super old school, so I'm a pen and paper girl as well, and it takes me forever to like type it all out on my laptop as well. I don't really consider myself an expert, so this question was really hard. I think the first thing that I really was intentional about when starting a blog was considering who my audience was, and trying to figure out, yeah, who I'm writing to and how to do that well. When we look at the way that Jesus lived his life, he always considered who his audience was. And so the way he, speaks to a Pharisee is completely different to the way he speaks to people who aren't on the Jewish faith. And so my blog, it does have a very wide readership, people who are, Bible college graduates and theologians, and then there's people who've, never even walked inside a church before. And so with each post, I need to actually carefully consider what words, what language, what kind of stories can I use to best serve my audience and to make sure that both, the people who know everything about the Bible and people who know nothing about the Bible can actually relate, and that Jesus is I guess made to look good, through the stories. I think the verse that really motivated me to think about these things is, knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. And I think so many Christians and churches can be very quick to share theology, but not in the most tactful of ways, and not necessarily in ways that are helpful in a world that's becoming more and more secular. And so I think it's really important to consider that.
That's really good. And you wrote an article recently that touched upon those things.
Yes.
Yeah, the title of that was "The Fires and Coronavirus and Kobe," right?
Yes.
And yeah, why don't you tell us about that one? Because that one we did publish on Sola. Yeah, why don't you tell me a little bit about the backstory behind that one? I guess the fires have been a big part on your mind right now. That's going on. Are you close to them right now? Like, what's going on?
So the fires aren't close to me, but it has affected, people that I've known, and and especially farmers who have actually gone through a lot, with Australia being in drought as well. So now that, they've had drought, and now they've lost their entire livelihood as well to fire. So it is a very sad time for our country, and on top of, the coronavirus, and then I think that week, Kobe, unfortunately passed away as well. And so it was just a week that was really, really heavy, and everyone was grieving. And I was seeing quite a few responses on my social media feeds where people were like, God is still good, and God is still in control, and God is working all things out for everyone's good. And yes, that is true, and that's theologically correct. But at the same time, I just didn't think it was the right time to be sharing knowledge, because it's not helpful in a world that's actually hurting and grieving, and actually asking a lot of questions, and reasonable questions, about God's character and whether he is good or not. And so I wrote that article to, I guess, spark conversation about the combination of theology and empathy that I think sharing truth in love requires us to be understanding and empathetic of people's spiritual questions and the grief that they're feeling. And often grief is a process. It takes a long time for people to actually get through to the other side of grief. And the Bible, it's full of lament as well. Yes, we're told to rejoice in the Lord always, but we're also invited to cry out to him and to ask him, questions when our hearts feel broken. And we see that in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus, his soul was so shaken up. He was like sweating blood from the stress of the cross that was to come before him. And what does he do? He actually prays and he asks God, can you take away my cup if it's in your will? And so Jesus shows us, yes, we can be faithful in suffering and submit to God's will, but at the same time, we can cry out to him with our questions and our hearts as well.
Yeah. I think you also mentioned Lazarus, right? In your article. Did you mention how Jesus wept? Did you mention that?
Yes. Yeah. I did. I
Yeah.
I forgot. When his friend dies, he cries.
Yeah.
Right?
How do, as you're thinking this through, as you're thinking about writing your article, do these Bible passages just spring up in your mind? Because what I'm impressed with your writing is how I think you kind of seamlessly integrate the Bible into your writing, whether it's through those stories or maybe, at the end, how you'll pad it at the end. Yeah. How does that process come about for you?
I'd like to think I'm super intentional and structured, but I'm not. I think it does just spring into my mind.
Because they just seemed like the perfect passages to illustrate what you were saying. Yeah.
So, the Holy Spirit is powerful, and with every post that I do write, I do pray that God would lead me and guide me. And I truly believe that my blog has, reached so many different types of people because of God's work. I did pray that, if it's God's will for me to become a writer, he would, I guess, what do I ask? I asked him to put my posts into people's inboxes, and they would be the right people, and they would be the people who actually need to hear these words right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's
they
great.
do just spring into my mind.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I mean, I know that obviously you read the stories before, you studied them before, so it's not like it's new revelation. Yeah, you've done the hard work to hide God's word in your heart already. So that way when you're ready to write an article, then yeah, it can come to your mind. I do want to talk about, more of God's calling on your writing, but first I want to talk about your other podcast, or your podcast, The Greatest Story Podcast.
Yes.
This is with your husband. You talk about movies. Tell me the story behind this podcast. Why do you guys want to do this?
So my husband is an introvert, and so his perfect date is an activity that requires no eye contact and no talking. I'm kind of exaggerating, but you know what I mean.
Sure, right.
And so we love watching movies together. Lucky for him, I love watching movies too. Yeah, so we spend quite a lot of our time, watching Netflix shows and watching movies. And so we wanted to put it to good use. And we thought, why not start a podcast that shares how the stories that are, being shown on the silver screen actually point us to the greatest story of the gospel? Because we do believe that every story in the world actually points us to, an aspect of God's character or an aspect of the gospel. And I think the podcast was also, a project of ours to equip millennials and the new generation to actually see the world with a gospel framework. And so when you were saying before, how do the Bible passages spring into your mind and how do you come up with all these stories and wrap things up? Well, I think I've really trained myself to try and see, the world with a gospel framework. How does this particular issue, or how does this particular emotion or struggle that I'm going through, how does that point me to, an aspect of the gospel or an aspect of God's character that answers, that heart longing. And so that's what The Greatest Story aims to do. Yeah.
And you guys do a really good job at that too. I think you guys cover a wide range of movies. Your first one was The Lion King, and then you did Spider-Man Far From Home. Then you went to Stranger Things. You did an episode on The Bachelor. And
that was my little hobby horse.
The Farewell, Joker, and your most recent one was Frozen 2. And I've listened to the episodes and I'm very like impressed with your ability to like find that Christian worldview in all of it. I think it's great. I think it's great.
Mm.
Yeah, like
And yeah, I think the more millennials can do this, the more our world will be able to see that Christianity is relevant to today. Like 2020, Christianity is still the answer to so many questions that we have. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Heidi, I do hope you continue to make more of those podcast episodes.
Thank you.
What's new on your horizon? You recently started something. You started a Patreon. Why don't you tell us about
Yes, I
that?
did.
Yeah.
So I never thought that writing would become a full-time thing. It was always just a hobby. But I think the more that my articles get shared and the more that people give me feedback that my voice is so vital in, I guess, the evangelical space, the more I feel compelled to actually take the time out to do this full time. And so, yeah, 2020 is a big year for me. I'm kind of scaling back on a very secure and regular income to pursue this creative thing, which is writing. And so I've started a Patreon account to hopefully get people to support me if they value my work. I guess what motivates me to actually take this risk and to go full time is I see a big gap in evangelical circles for perspectives like mine. I'm a woman, I'm a millennial, I'm an Asian Australian. And so I have all these like weird things that shape my life experiences. And I think as more and more, Asian immigrants come to faith in Western countries, we actually need more resources that speak into our worldview. And, the Australian census in 2016, it said that there are actually more immigrants from Asia than there are from Europe currently living in Australia. And I don't know if that's the same in America, but, the demographics in Australia is changing, and that's going to be reflective in the church. And so we need to have more resources and more stories and more voices that speak into, I guess, the Southeast Asian worldview, and to present to them the greatest story of the gospel, that Jesus is for them as well. And, Jesus is not just a figure for Western people, but he's a savior for those in the East as well.
Yeah. What are your Patreon perks? Is one of them to see preview new articles? Is that what it is? Or is it to
so you'll get exclusive access to new content and bonus content and behind the scenes stuff. Also, I'm writing a devotional that's going to come out in April. So if you buy the mid-tier, you'll get a free devotional as well. And yeah, there's other perks as well.
What I guess one of your upcoming articles is around Valentine's Day?
Yes. So that's a Patreon exclusive. And basically, my parents recently celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary.
Okay.
Congrats to them. Yeah, it was really special. And it's special because they don't have the perfect marriage. Growing up, I knew that they were very unhappy. And they too have an amazing story where, their marriage started off with regret, and then it became a story of redemption, where God actually came in and through his example of, love and forgiveness and grace and reconciliation, my parents actually, I guess, improved their marriage. And it's just such an amazing testimony, and I had front row seats to that. And so I will be sharing that, in my next article for patrons.
Man, that's awesome. Heidi, this is really good stuff. I'm excited for what 2020 is going to bring to you, what God will do through you and your writing and your ministry. Thanks for being open and sharing it with all of us here.
Oh, good. Thanks for giving me the opportunity and platform. You and Hannah have been awesome.
Oh, it's been fun. And I do hope that we can talk again soon. I think
yes.
I think this is cool. I think we're just gonna have to work out our schedules being in LA and Australia. But hey, if we did it this time, I think we can make it work again.
Yes, definitely. And if you're ever in Australia, please come to Brisbane, not Sydney, and say hello.
I absolutely will. And same for LA. Come and pay us a visit.
Yes. Definitely.
Thanks, Heidi. Thanks, Heidi, for being my guest on the show, and thank you everyone for listening. If you have a question to ask Heidi about writing, movies, or Brisbane, Australia, send them to us on Twitter or Instagram. Heidi is at Heidi Tai on Twitter and at Heidi Tai Writes on Instagram. I am at MusicGoon on Twitter and at Dive In Dig Deep on Instagram. I'll put all the links in the show notes, of course. TGIF is a linkless column I curate for Sola Network every Friday. Be sure to check that out, and you can also subscribe to it via email. I'll put the link in the show notes. Sola Network exists to influence the emerging generation with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Visit us online, sola.network, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at The Sola Network. In the show notes, you'll find the link to our Sola Network podcast feed, and you can also subscribe on YouTube or Spotify. Just search for Sola Network. Thanks. See you soon.